So I'll take my usual afternoon role, which is to hopefully gain a few minutes on the agenda. I know, pleasing Diane as well as hopefully everyone else who's suffering a post-lunch slump. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the farmer-to-farmer case studies. This I see as the other big extension effort under REACH. There have certainly been multiple other pieces, fact sheets that we've done to help people understand how to look at modeling results, for example, would be an extension effort that we haven't covered here, but this is a big one. And it's a big team. So these are all people who are involved in core case study writing, but the others in this case is really a big group of people because the case studies include both sort of a farmer's story, but also sidebars that try and bring in some of the science that's related to their story. And so that has included people across the project and really across the objectives, from the monitoring team to the cropping systems team, of course, biotics. I don't think the data management team has contributed. Well, actually, that's not true because in putting together the maps, the data team helped us a little bit. So this is really a project-wide effort. So just a minute to remind you why a case study approach. Basically, the goal was to provide producers with information that would help them make decisions about whether or not to adopt certain practices, and to look at practices that forward-thinking farmers are already using in this region that are likely to benefit climate mitigation and adaptation. And I guess I put that in parentheses because we knew this going into it, that nobody's adopting these practices because it's going to help them adapt to climate change or because it's going to mitigate climate change. And yet that is one important co-benefit that they're going to get. And then we had already this history of existing successful case studies in this region, the direct seed case studies that had been done around 99, 98, 2000. So that provided also an impetus to say, here we are 10, 15 years later, what are the new practices that farmers would find some useful information from each other about? And then we wanted to promote information sharing across a relatively large and diverse region. And so this is part of the reason we said, well, we want to do a little bit more than just a case study. We think that's really valuable and important for providing some detailed information, but we also want to provide, we decided to do some videos to help just bridge that distance and do something a little bit updated. So I think of the case studies as basically these two parts, right? There's the video and there's the written case study with the sidebars. In some sense, the video acts as a teaser, hopefully, to pull people in and spend some more time with the written document. There's case study locations across the region, both dryland and irrigated systems. We did get two sets of additional funding to expand the case studies to look at some other systems. So there's one case study in Elma, Washington that's looking at dairy, but really about water-related issues, flooding. One in Cheney, Washington, looking at beef cattle operation, and in George, Washington, looking at strip tillage and onions. I'll include that here since it's related in terms of tillage. And then I'm just going to page through these. I am not going to provide a lot of detail. I guess what I'll tell you is probably the first set, you'll be like, I know those guys. I mean, Eric, obviously, you know him, he's here. But we also featured this case study at an annual meeting. So these case studies have been in the works for a while. And then hopefully as I get to the end, you'll be like, oh, I didn't know they were doing that one too. And I guess I will also say the case studies are still a work in progress, maybe lost out a little bit to the work on advances. So almost all the videos are complete at this point and up on the REACH website. The written case studies take longer to get through. I think we have 3 published at this point, another 3 or so coming as soon as the designer can get off of advances, and then others still have some work to go. So Eric Oberg, this was a case study about precision nitrogen application. And we have Steve and Becky Camp. This was a case study really about enhancing crop diversity, and you can see spring peas, and I think that's spring canola there, although they also grow a fair bit of camelina. They're in the transitional zone. This is Bill Jepson, flex cropping, so he's, I think Dave Huggins touched on this, but he really developed a system that helps support his decisions about when can he crop either a spring crop instead of fallow, or sometimes recrop winter wheat. And using he's in the winter wheat fallow region, but he is cropping 66% of his land instead. So with all the benefits in terms of income and also growing more residue and supporting soil organic matter. Ron and Andy Juris, this is a case study primarily about their use of the stripper header, although it also touches on direct seeding. And they really feel like the use of the stripper header provides better conditions for seedlings in their dry conditions, cutting wind speeds, shading the soil, helping them capture a tiny bit more moisture. And then Ron Juray, this is looking at conservation tillage in a winter wheat fallow system. So primarily his use of the undercutter, although he is also experimenting with no-till fallow in some cases on smaller acreages. Drew Leach, this is Drew's in Idaho, and he's looking at a grazed cover cropping system. He had been involved in some research, I think supported with a REACCH mini grant, actually, looking at cover cropping, and he was looking at both spring-seeded and fall-seeded cover crops. He can grow both. The one we're covering in the case study is his spring-seeded cover crops, and he had already had a grazing operation. So this complements his grazing operation really nicely in that he can switch the cows off of forage, which he is not so great on his land as he gets into the summer. So he switches them over to these cover crops. And both, I guess, grazing them directly on the cover crop, this is swathed, and then also baling some of the cover crop to feed to the cows later. And then Steve and Nate Riggers, this is another case study about enhancing crop diversity. And I think Bill Pan is the one who really made a strong argument to me that we should have 2 case studies about diversity. It's worth it. And it looks different in different areas. So they're in Idaho, also in the wetter area, and do an amazing array of things from turf grass seed to reclamation grasses, seed crops, buckwheat here, canola, and some other crops. Those are the dryland case studies. These are the irrigated ones. Dale Geese, mustard cover cropping and potatoes. This is son Mike in the cover crop just before they tilled it in. It's an arugula mustard mix. And they get a biofumigant effect from it, so they can grow potatoes more intensively. They're actually on a 2-year rotation into potatoes instead of 3 or 4, which is more standard. And it allows them to not use chemical fumigants. The piece that we were really interested in also, though, is that's an enormous amount of organic matter to be adding to your system. So they get a good benefit there, too. Eric Williamson is a case study about strip tillage and livestock integration. He's using really a wide variety of strategies to add organic matter to his system. So strip tillage, cover cropping, livestock integration, so he's grazing those cows on the residues that are left from the strip tillage, and then also adding manures as a soil amendment. And Jake Madison, this is a really fascinating case study about deficit irrigation. They have limited water rights, so they basically had a junior groundwater right that was revoked there in Oregon. And Jake's father actually applied for and got the first has the first aquifer storage and recovery project for an agricultural operation in the world. This is not the bulk of their water. The bulk of their water comes from the main stem of the Columbia, but their sort of secondary water sources, which are this aquifer storage and recovery project, a small creek, Butter Creek, that's labeled there, and then they also accept water from a processor. Those water sources are really critical because they're sort of on the steep part of that curve where they see yield impacts for every drop of water they can get. So they deal with their water shortage. Basically they're growing more acreage than they can fully irrigate. They deficit irrigate corn, alfalfa, and wheat in order to fully irrigate potatoes and onions. They're high-value crops. So this is a really unusual strategy, both for coping with water shortage and for the way he thinks about risk and economic returns. And then Lauren Griggs' strip tillage of onions. This is one that is mostly completed with complementary funding from Western SARE, and basically looking at strip tillage and the use of that system to reduce wind erosion and the need to replant onions. That's it, except I'll say, again, as I noted, we have mostly the videos complete at this point. This is a little bit of data showing you how much they're viewed. And in total, the videos, which I would say most of them have been completed over the last year, have had over 4,000 views so far. Well, that was as of December. I guess it must be higher now because I'm looking at this now. Juris has 3,600 on its own. I guess the other thing I would say about the case study products is one nice indication we've seen is that people have used it a number of times at conferences, and I suspect both Andy Juris is pretty connected individual, so I think that's part of why the numbers are so good for his video, but also it was used at a high residue farming workshop in the Columbia Basin, so I think that's also why the numbers are so much better since late October or November. That's it.